Hi, and welcome back to Somatic Wise, where people and nature can heal each other. Today's video is about the intersection between the COVID-19 global pandemic, the shelter-in-place mandate to protect people from the virus, and the intersection with trauma. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma, and especially developmental trauma, just to make sure that everybody watching this is at least somewhat up to speed on my working definition of trauma. And then we're going to talk about how this specific situation is particularly likely to push people's buttons and call up triggers that might be unknown from earlier in life. So here we go. First of all, it's useful to talk about what is trauma. And what I learned in my somatic experiencing training is that a lot of people think that trauma isn't an event. A car accident is traumatic. War is certainly traumatic. But what I learned as a somatic psychotherapist is that really trauma is the reaction in the nervous system, which explains why some people are more traumatized by certain events than other people. Trauma is the stress imprint that's left in our nervous system after an event that's very stressful or overwhelming. It leaves a person with a tendency to go into fight or flight arousal. That's so much energy being called up by the body in a stress response. Developmental trauma is when this happens when the person is still developing during childhood. Most of the time it involves overwhelm, abuse, failure to get the child's needs met when we're young and vulnerable. It often involves a failure of some sort by the part of the parents, the other caregivers. This can be voluntary or involuntary. Obviously, child abuse and neglect is known to be traumatic, but there's other circumstances as well that can leave their imprint on our early developing nervous system. It influences the way our nervous system installs its software. We're born with all the hardware we need to be able to grow up and develop and wire ourselves to get ready for the world. But the software, if you will, is installed by interactions with our caregivers. That's what teaches our nervous system how to balance itself. And when the parent isn't available, maybe they're being neglectful or abusive, but maybe they're ill. Maybe there's a war they're called into. Maybe they're sick themselves with something. Maybe some circumstance in life that they can't help pulls them away from the child. All of this influences the way our nervous system wires itself, and that is what is known as developmental trauma. That's such a short explanation. If you're interested, you can look up ACEs, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. It initiated in Kaiser Permanente, and basically it identified, I think it started with about 7 experiences that are known to likely correlate with developmental trauma. I think now it's expanded to about 12, but there's a questionnaire online that people can take to see if they may have been influenced by these events, and they might be carrying the residue of earlier events in their nervous system. Now, the thing about trauma is that these early experiences and also later experiences, they filter the way in which we see the world. As far as our body is concerned, if something kind of feels like an earlier experience that we had, even if it's not directly related, it doesn't logically seem like the same thing. If it feels kind of similar to our body, then our threat response cycle and our inner wiring will respond as though it is actually happening again now. And so the underlayers of our mind and body will start to experience some sympathetic nervous system, that's fight and flight arousal, and that's when people get a lot of symptoms. So that's what people mean by triggering. If something feels like something bad that happened before, part of us will start to react. And what I'm saying here in this video is that the very unusual global pandemic situation that we find ourselves in is particularly likely to be activating that in people, and we'll see why in just a moment. All right, just like always, this video is intended for public information and education only. It's not treatment advice. I do strongly suggest that people who may be resonating with some things being talked about here do seek their own consultation and psychotherapy for their own individual selves. This is just general stuff. I will provide some resources links in the description of the video below So go ahead and check that out. There's some great resources on there. And also during the pandemic, many of us have moved to video therapy called telehealth so that people can still get their mental health needs met and practice social distancing. Many of us also have sliding scales available or accept insurance, and there's free and low-cost therapy options. So don't give up on yourself. Make sure and get the support that you need. All right, so I'm going to talk about patterns that are commonly associated with developmental trauma. It doesn't mean that everybody who has this pattern has something that we would call developmental trauma. I'm not here to say that. I'm saying that these are common indicators or results in many cases. And then I'm going to talk about how the global pandemic effectively plugs into those and just makes a really nearly invisible, but when you know what's going on, you can see how it just fits in like that and can really exacerbate the stress response in ways that we may not be consciously aware of. In somatic experiencing, we talk about different categories of trauma, and one of the categories is called inescapable attack. Basically, if something is inescapable and the person is unable to mount an effective fight or flight response to get away from it, it's inescapable, then that causes a lot of stress to stay in the nervous system. It's a lot of nervous system activation that is kind of stuck because it has nowhere to go, right? That's inescapable attack. If anything's inescapable, it's a global pandemic. I don't think that there's anywhere you can really go to avoid this. So there it is. That's one way in which the global pandemic is particularly likely to elevate our stress response. Another one is called autonomy structure. Body dynamics is a school of somatic therapy that comes out of Northern Europe, and they talk about character structures that kind of ways our personality is pruned by early experiences, kind of the way that developmental trauma can shape us. And basically, the way I understand it is that if somebody's nervous system is kind of trained in this fashion, that they learn that the only way that they can reliably get their important needs met is through their own selves, that either nobody else cares or their efforts are ineffective or worse than that, then they may end up with something called autonomy structure, or the autonomy is very important to the person. I need to do things my way, and I'm going to do what I like and move to my own rhythms, and that's really important to me. Well, you can see how the government telling us how to live our lives, go here, don't go there, do this, don't do that, can be very stressful for somebody who's learned to survive basically according to their own instincts and their own rhythms. So this can be very stressful and potentially even lead to some acting out. No, I'm not going to wear my mask. I'm going to kind of do what I want. On the other hand, another thing that we commonly see associated with trauma in the formative years is boundary violations. Now, a boundary is where I stop and the world starts, or where the world stops and I start. This is my space and you can't come in without my permission. Developmental trauma often, or always, I would all just about say, can't say always, I can't say always about anyone or anything, but very, 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 very commonly, developmental trauma involves boundary violations, right? So boundary violations go back to the inescapable attack piece, because if you're little and you can't defend yourself from somebody crossing into your boundaries, you're going to be mad about it, but there's nothing you can do, so the mad tends to stay in there a lot, or if you do something, you might get clobbered. So these days, maybe being an adult or a teenager, when somebody who might come from that sort of a background experiences these people acting according to their own autonomy, they could get really mad. Like, how can you go around without a mask on? Don't blow your germs into my space. Keep away from me. Keep the 6 foot distance. I want more than 6 feet. I want my boundaries to be protected. And so you can see where people who have more autonomy don't tell me what to do. This is what I need to do to take care of myself. And I'm going to make myself important because nobody else did when I was growing up. That can conflict with people who's had boundary crossings a lot. And when people crowd up on them in the grocery store or blow their germs into their space or run by jogging without a mask on, that can really stress people out who have had boundary violations in their past. Many people who grow up with unsupportive environments experience a basic sense of powerlessness, like nothing I can do is effectual in creating positive change for myself or in my environment. And this global pandemic is so large and so it hits us on so many levels. It is very good at calling up that pre-existing sense of powerlessness if it's in there. Developmental trauma, many people that I've spoken with have survived an ungodly number of terrible things in their past talk about this underlying, almost unconscious, sometimes very conscious, but always kind of present sense of doom, like things are going to be bad, everything's going to be terrible, it's just going to collapse. And the great amount of fear in our society, all over our social media, this undercurrent of fear and uncertainty is particularly good at bringing up that underlying pre-existing sense of doom, maybe to an exaggerated extent. And things are bad out there economically, with respect to people's health, with respect to the amount of people we're losing, with respect to the natural environment. There's all sorts of tie-ins to the natural environment. It's bad, and when you have this pre-existing sense of doom, it can be called up disproportionately. So maybe the doom is this big, but our nervous system is making it this big, which goes back into paralysis, which means that we kind of go into a freeze immobility state, and we're maybe not taking actions that we actually could take to make things better for ourselves or for others around us. Family systems that are impacted by mental health difficulties, substance abuse, a lot of poverty, stress, multiple layers of stressors will oftentimes have their family boundary system greatly impacted by this. And this can result in the caregivers communicating inconsistent boundaries to the children. Do this. No, maybe today I'm feeling like that, so do that. The boundaries can keep changing, but the child is held responsible for kind of mind reading and following them anyway. And in COVID-19, we didn't know anything about it when it first happened. There's been a lot of information it's been coming along pretty fast. I mean, I guess we've only been in this a couple months at this point. We're learning a lot. But at first it was really bad and we didn't really know what was going on. So what do? Do we stay at home? It's really important to stay home, except we have to go out because that's good for our mental health. And, we have to wear a mask. Is it the right kind of mask? Is it sealed properly? Is it okay if we're wearing a mask, or should we still stay more than 6 feet? Or is it 10 feet? Or how far does the virus really go? Well, it goes farther than that, maybe if we're exercising or if it's aerosolized, but that's in the lab and maybe real life conditions are different. So the boundaries are like really fudgy a lot of times, and that kind of feeling of, oh my god, it's this, it's that, it's this, it's that, it's disorienting, I'm not quite sure, but I better follow it or terrible things are going to happen, that can be very reminiscent within the way the person feels of a dysfunctional family boundary system growing up. Sort of this push-pull, it's coming at us from all sides. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy. Should we open? Should we close? Are people going to die anyway? Did I give you the COVID? I don't know. Do I have it? I don't know. We don't have tests. Well, now we're starting to have tests, and the first tests weren't really reliable. Oh my gosh, how do I get my needs met? Did I give it to you? I don't know. You could get it from anywhere. This is very disorienting, and again, this can bring up the stress of very unclear boundaries in a family system, but yet there's an imperative somehow to follow these unclear boundaries. And this can really elevate a person's stress response. There's a lot of arguing in society about what to do about all this. And again, when you grow up in a family that's been impacted by multiple issues that make communication and boundaries suboptimal, all this arguing in society can call up memories of the arguing, just the vehemence and the anger. Everybody's charged up about this. I think that this global pandemic is affecting us in so many different ways that it's got something for everybody. It's kind of getting us coming and going. If we don't have this particular pattern, it can get us in that one. But so there's a lot of arguing because people are very charged up about this sort of thing. It's their well-being, it's their livelihood. Here's another way in which it's very stressful. All the resources that we use on a daily basis to soothe ourselves, well, not all of them, but a lot of them are gone. Gatherings, parties, festivals, weddings, people are losing their graduations over this. Major personal and cultural milestones are kind of vanishing. These are things that are pillars in our life. I love going to coffee houses. There's nothing better for me than to sit down in front of a window with my journal and my favorite latte, and it just feels so good. Can't go to a coffee house right now, can't go out dancing, nothing like that. So our the things that kind of make us feel good in life and would compensate for this heightened stress are not available right now, or available in small amounts, because we have to do this to keep the infection rate low enough so that medical people can adequately serve it. But this is one of the ways in which the things we're being asked to do are very hard. They're not overtly hard, but they're subtly hard, and they do build up in us. And I think this is why we're getting quarantine fatigue, and people are starting to act out a little bit and kind of blow off the quarantine. I'm not saying it's a great thing, because the need to keep nervous or physical bodies who are more vulnerable safe, that need remains. And this quarantine situation is hard. It's hard on our human nature. So another aspect of trauma that generally tends to not be too much on the public radar is something that can occur either developmentally when somebody's growing up or as an adult, and this is medical trauma. Medical trauma is possibly the least well-known form of trauma that there is, because people just kind of tend to think, oh, well, I had this happen or that happened, and it's just kind of the way it goes, and it was stressful, but it's over now. But that too can leave a lasting imprint on our unconscious nervous system, and it can cause a lot of stress, fight and flight, arousal, if something that feels like that comes back up again. So medical trauma obviously can be activated by the COVID-19 situation, particularly because this specific virus is so unusual. It's just perplexing in the kind of random seeming different ways that it strikes people. And that can also add to just, even if you haven't had medical trauma, it's pretty stressful, but if you have, then that can be particularly likely to add to a sense of unease or distress. One very common pattern that happens in people's nervous systems when they may have experienced difficulties growing up, difficulties in family dynamics, is something that we can just call, I'm bad and wrong. Everything's my fault. It's really my fault. I didn't do it good enough. Not only did I make a mistake, I'm the mistake. And this can be at varying levels, from a subtle undercurrent to in the person's face all the time, this sort of thinking and the feelings of shame that go with it. Again, this is particularly likely to be activated by the current COVID-19 shelter-in-place global pandemic, because it's so perplexing. Am I doing it right? Did I give them the COVID? I don't know. You can't see it. It's very difficult to orient to something that you can't see, which is another source of particular stress and activation. If you can't see something, you can't kind of orient to it and deal with it. But this I'm bad and wrong leads people to exaggerate their sense of, it's all my fault, I didn't do it right. And with the differing opinions and practices that seem to have been changing frequently around how to responsibly handle this virus, that pattern, if it's already been installed in somebody, is particularly likely to be activated. In conclusion, I think it's really important to be kind and gentle with ourselves and each other, because this is a very difficult time. Even as I sit here in my office all by myself, since we're social distancing and working through telehealth, as I sit here in my office and I look out the window, everything looks fairly normal. There's cars going by on the major street. There's not, thank goodness, there's not tanks rolling down the street or anything. It's still really stressful out there in these subtle ways that I've attempted to begin to summarize in this video. As you can see, this is a very complicated topic. But it's hard, especially because we can't gather, we're losing major milestones in our lives with weddings and graduations and parties and things like that, it's hard on us. It's not our human nature to be isolative, even as the biological nature of this virus is demanding it. This is also what's known as a liminal period. It's not exactly this anymore, but it hasn't gone all the way to that either. It's a period of change. I talk more about liminal periods in another video I have on this channel. It's called Monarch Butterfly Science and Soul, and it's near the end of the video in talking about this really adorable little caterpillar that goes through this transition in a chrysalis and turns into this gorgeous butterfly. I think that in general, it's important to remember to actively resist any of these feelings of doom and stuck and overwhelmed and stressed, and it's all going to be terrible. That may come from developmental trauma. It may come from messages we're getting from the media. Let's keep our eye on the prize. This is a liminal period. It's a period of change and shift. Let's keep our eye on the changes that we want to see in society, in the world. One thing that the random and difficult nature of this virus has brought home to me is that all over again, is that we can't take any days for granted. Life is such a fragile gift. And so for me, it's become prominent to live every day according to my own guiding principles. Like I ask myself, what do I want my life to stand for? One of the things I want my life to stand for is every human being has a value and is important. Another one is protecting our natural environment, which could be a whole nother video about how COVID-19 could have come from, and its cousins have come from, many different abuses of ecosystems and animals that remove the checks and balances on the ecosystems that could have prevented this virus from getting so big in the first place. But that's a tangent. That's probably another video. For me, I'm trying to do my best to keep my eye on the prize. What do I want to see happen? Supporting people, slowing down, making sure to enjoy every day, and keeping my eye on what I want to see in the world, which one of the things is restoration of land. This is a great time to be in nature, even in cities. People have backyards. If people don't have backyards, there are parks with social distancing. There are community gardens. There are ways to involve ourselves in projects to support biodiversity, which is our best defense for the future against really bad things happening in the planet, getting out of balance in our ecosystems. So remember, this is a liminal period. It has the opportunity for a lot of good changes. Let's try not to get too mired down in the doom and gloom of developmental trauma. Keep our eye on what truly is very devastating and difficult, but also keep it in balance. Keep our eye on what good could come of this. So thank you for watching Somatic Wise. I hope you're healthy and well and remain that way. Feel free to leave comments below. And until next time, take care. Thank you for watching this video. If you would like to support my work of getting this information out into the world, you could subscribe to receive notification of future videos. You could contribute to my Patreon account to support this channel, and of course, please feel free to share this video with others. Take care. Until next time, be well.